Hello there, brothers and sisters. Thanks for joining me again. About a week ago, I covered a story where the BBC had been caught editing a Trump speech in order to make it look like Trump incited the January 6th violence at the Capitol in the US. And I thought that was shocking and something should happen on that. Well, guess what? Today, Tim Davie resigns as BBC Director General after accusations of serious and systemic bias in coverage. Wow. So he did get held to account. I think this is probably because the BBC has to go before Parliament tomorrow for an inquiry on the bias, and heads had to roll. Not only did they annoy Trump, which whether you like him or not, it's not a good idea to annoy arguably the world's most powerful man. And in that same whistleblower report, the BBC was accused of putting their thumb on the scale for pro-Palestine and pro-trans stories and minimizing negative stories on those. It's a big scandal. Let's get into a little more detail here. Davie says, departure is my own decision. Yeah, right. While head of news also quits, insiders say. It feels like a coup by the broadcaster's enemies. Well, of course it seems like a coup because the lefties are controlling the BBC. We all know that. If I remember right, the whistleblower said in his dossier, a small group of LGBTQ activists were controlling the narrative on trans agenda. And I'm sure it's similar on the Palestine issue. And you know, everyone hates Trump. They were doing the world a service to help Biden beat Trump. Tim Davie, the BBC's Director General and head of the BBC News, have resigned after a former advisor in the corporation accused it of serious and systemic bias in its coverage of issues including Donald Trump, Gaza, and trans rights. In an announcement that caused shock within the corporation, Davie said his departure was entirely my decision, and it comes as the BBC prepares to apologize for the way it edited a Trump speech. Deborah Turnus, the head of BBC News, has also resigned. Sources within the department described a mood of dismay at Turnus's exit. It feels like a coup, one said. This is the result of a campaign by political enemies of the BBC. Everyone knows these two didn't resign. They were forced out by the board and by the government, I'm sure. And on top of that, Trump has a history of going after his enemies in the news and suing them. There's a high likelihood that he's going to bring a lawsuit in British or American courts against the BBC. It'll be interesting to see how that turns out. They're trying to get out ahead of that and mitigate that now and hopefully placate the man. It's a huge moment for the corporation as it heads into critical talks with the government over its future and funding. The hunt is now on to fill two of the biggest roles in British media. The Commons Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee had set a Monday deadline for the BBC to respond to the claims made by Michael Prescott, a former independent external advisor to its editorial guidelines and standards committee. He left the role this summer. Prescott criticized the editing of the Trump speech in an edition of Panorama, which spliced together clips from an address the U.S. president made on the 6th of January 21. The edit suggested Trump told the crowd, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you, and we fight like hell." The words were taken from sections of his speech almost an hour apart. The incident has led to criticism of the BBC by Carolyn Levitt, Trump's press secretary, who described the corporation this weekend as 100% fake news and a propaganda machine. That's exactly right. If you want to be fake news and a propaganda machine, that's fine, but you shouldn't have to make the general public pay for your nonsense. If there's going to be a license fee and everyone who watches the television has to pay it, then it needs to be impartial. You can't be picking sides. Carolyn Levitt is quite right. The BBC is 100% fake news and a propaganda machine. Last night, Levitt appeared to celebrate the departures, referring on X to her complaints about the BBC's treatment of the U.S. president's speech. Trump described the BBC as corrupt journalists, posting on his Truth Social platform. These are very dishonest people who tried to step on the scales of a presidential election. Yep, they sure did. They didn't just try, they did. On top of everything else, they're from a foreign country, one that many consider our number one ally. What a terrible thing for democracy. However, there's been concern within the government that while the Prescott letter contains serious problems, it is also being used by the corporation's political opponents to destabilize it. Well, then you should have stayed impartial, BBC. In a note to staff, Davie said that he had retained the unswerving and unanimous support of the BBC's board and chair, Samir Shah. Yeah, sure, throughout. However, he said the current accusations had contributed to his decision. Like all public organizations, the BBC is not perfect, and we must always be open, transparent, and accountable, he said. While not being the only reason, the current debate around BBC News has understandably contributed to my decision. Overall, the BBC is delivering well, but there have been some mistakes made, and as Director General, I have to take ultimate responsibility. Yep, that's right. Davie's departure comes after a torrid year in which the BBC has been criticized over comments of its former presenter, Gary Linker, the live streaming of Glastonbury Festival performance of the rap punk duo Bob Vylan, and criticisms over a Gaza documentary. Yeah, all of these were shocking. A shakeup is needed at BBC, 100%. The departure of Davies and Turness appear to be an attempt to protect the BBC from further attacks following Prescott's criticisms, which he made in a letter to the BBC board. They're in damage control mode. Like I said, Trump might sue them, the Tories, Reform, other groups that are critical of the government are going to come after the BBC. And yes, somebody had to be accountable. The BBC needs to get back to being truly impartial, truly be a real news organization and not a fake news propaganda organization, and also use some common sense. If radicals make complaints because one of the presenters is given a script to read that says pregnant people, which is an activist term in and of itself, and then she actually defines pregnant person as women and has a little smile, that's a very normal reaction. She should not have been censured by the Standards Committee for that. She should never have been given those words to say. So again, BBC needs impartiality and the BBC needs common sense. Shaw and Davie's departure was a sad day for the BBC. He has had the full support of me and the board throughout, he said. However, I understand the continued pressure on him, personally and professionally, which has led him to take this decision today. The whole board respects his decisions and the reasons for it. Oh no, they told him he needed to resign, 100%. The Prescott letter, which was passed to the Daily Telegraph, also condemned BBC Arabic for using contributors who had expressed anti-Semitic views. It included the views of a contributor who had previously stated online that Jews should be burned as Hitler did. The BBC has previously said he should not have been featured in the way he was. Another featured contributor has described Jews online as devils. The BBC said in May that a person had been barred from being a contributor in the future. So it seems this impartiality just goes one way. Is it just me? Tell me in the comments. But whenever the BBC breaks its impartiality rules, it seems to do it on the left all the time and lets people get away with outrageous conduct. It's not good enough, folks. And if the people are having to pay for it, all these people should be sacked. I really hope the new Director General comes in and sacks more people. One of them being whoever wrote that script and put in pregnant people. Because we all know pregnant people are women. Somebody, feel free in the comments to name one pregnant man ever. I'll wait. The culture secretary, Lisa Nandy, had said she was confident that Shaw and Davie were treating this with the seriousness that it demands. In her departure note to staff, Turness said, the ongoing controversy around the Panorama or President Trump has reached a stage where it is causing damage to the BBC, an institution that I love. As the CEO of BBC News and Current Affairs, the buck stops with me. In public life, leaders need to be fully accountable, and that's why I'm stepping down. Yes, their statements were actually pretty good, both of them, but we know they both got fired. However, she used her departure statement to push back on Prescott's allegations of general bias at the corporation. While mistakes have been made, I want to be absolutely clear. Recent allegations that BBC News is institutionally biased are wrong, she said. While many BBC figures believe Prescott's letter refers to some genuine errors, there's also concern that it is being used by political opponents. Hey, everyone watching, what do you think? Is the news coverage biased? Is this just an isolated incident that's being blown out of proportion by people that don't like the BBC? I don't think so. Some BBC figures point to an effort to shift the corporation politically, dating back to Boris Johnson's time in government. The Guardian has been told Prescott's appointment as an external advisor had been pushed by the BBC board member Rob Gibb, Theresa May's former communications chief, who helped set up the right-wing broadcaster GB News. Gibb was first placed on the BBC board during Johnson's time in government. Gibb and Prescott had previously been reported as being friends. Gibb was on a 4-person interview panel that appointed Prescott. Johnson told The Guardian that any suggestion of an attempt to undermine the BBC was complete and utter bollocks, Prescott said in a letter, and his criticisms do not come with any political agenda. And so during the damage control, they're all saying, oh, these are isolated incidents or small problems, but it's not overall bias. Nonsense. Just look at the results. Somebody doctored a Trump speech to make him look bad. Tell me if I'm wrong. 100%. Somebody snuck in pregnant person into the news. That's definitely a leftist talking point. On the Palestinian issue, they definitely let Hamas activists have their say and didn't give equal time to people supporting Israel. Again, tell me if I'm wrong. So even if the whistleblower is right-wing, which they're implying even if they're not saying it, and this is a right-wing thing, all these things they did were in support of leftist causes. And we all know that being right-wing now in Britain just means you don't agree with every single little thing that the lunatics on the left say. Everyone should be proud to be right-wing. That just means that you're normal. So this was a good result. I'm glad these two got sacked. Got to be some accountability. Now the sackings need to continue. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe if you do. And if you don't like it, don't watch it. Thanks. Bye.